I am not particularly intelligent. Seriously. In school, my grades were average. Despite the fact that I spent a lot of time studying and practicing for tests. It wasn't that my parents weren't supportive. They were. They're teachers. But when all the effort I put into school yielded only mediocre results, I concluded that I simply wasn't smart enough. Maybe life isn't that fair, I thought. But then one day, I was sitting in history class, and we had just gotten back a history test. And I was looking over at my neighbor, who had gotten an A. He was a top student. I wasn't. And I told him that I wish I was as smart as you. He looked back at me and said, I don't really think I'm that smart. Well, then how do you do it? I asked. I don't know, he said, but my mom always quizzes me on the details, and I find it very helpful. Huh. I had never thought of that. Now, of course, I know that quizzing yourself is a much more powerful way to learn than simply rereading. But back then, I had no idea. Back then, I hadn't even considered the possibility that there might be more than one way to read, more than one way to take notes. I just thought studying was studying. To get ahead, you're either naturally more intelligent, or you simply spent more time than everyone else. But now, I was challenged to consider that perhaps what matters is how you study and how you spend your time. And even my brain could appreciate that how I spend my time was up to me. How you spend your time is up to you. I didn't have to be smart to spend my time in a smart way. So I asked myself this question: how can I learn more effectively? And I began to read effectively on how to memorize information, how to manage my time, how to write more persuasively, and lots of other things as well. And sure enough, my study habits began to improve. Now, these were simple changes. I had put a paperclip at the back of my book so that I didn't have to flick through to find the glossary. I started slowing down so that I actually understood what it was that I was reading. And yep, I started quizzing myself before tests, just like my friend did. The point, you see, is that to significantly improve your performance, it's about lots of little changes, simple changes. It doesn't have to be complicated. But the effect can be profound. For me, my grades went up, and by the time I graduated from high school, I was no longer an average student. I was the student with the highest grade point average. Then I went to college, and from there to here. The University of Oxford, considered one of the best universities in the world. And this is me. How's that for a school uniform? Do you like that bow tie? And I'm smiling in that picture because being in Oxford was so surreal for me. It didn't seem that long ago that I was struggling, feeling hopeless, that I wasn't smart enough. And when you doubt yourself, you ask can-based questions. Can I do this? Or can I do that? At least that's what I did. But I've come to dislike such can-based questions because the word can implies that what you want to do might not be possible. What made a difference for me, what marked a turning point for me, was when I stopped self-pitying and instead came up with a better question. How can I learn more effectively? And I believe that there is great power in that question because it contains that word, how. Because when you ask how, you change your mindset. You become solution-oriented. Because when you ask how, the premise is that whatever you want to do is possible. You just need to find the way. In 1961, as you know, President Kennedy pledged to send a man to the moon and back within a decade. NASA had no idea how to do it. Many thought it wasn't even possible. But Kennedy wasn't asking, can we do it? He just said, we're going to do it. The only question is how. So that's what the engineers focused on, and they succeeded. Now, your challenge might not be related to learning, as it was in my case, or putting your foot on the moon. But asking how will benefit you no matter what challenge lies in front of you, whether that's landing a job, helping someone you care about, or simply finding a way to ask someone out on a date. So let me share with you 3 pieces of advice on how to ask and solve how questions. And my first advice is that you need to define the right problem so that you can ask the right how question to begin with. When I was struggling in school, I thought that the problem was that I wasn't smart enough. Once I redefined that as poor study habits, a solution became much easier. There was this office building in New York City that had a very slow elevator. So when workers complained about this, the building manager assumed that the elevator was making workers late for meetings. Solution? You might think a faster elevator, but they're very expensive. It turned out that the workers weren't getting late for meetings. It was just that they hated to wait for the elevator to arrive because they got bored. Once the real problem was established, the building manager could ask a better how question. How to reduce that waiting time, or at least make it less boring. Much simpler. The building manager put up mirrors next to the elevator, and with that, workers could check their clothes, they could check their hair, and they had something to do while waiting for the elevator to arrive. And believe it or not, all the complaints disappeared. My second piece of advice is to give it some time. Relax. It's so easy to rush. Have you ever forgotten the name of a person you know, or a place you've been, a movie you once saw? Then half an hour later, it comes to you. Research shows that when we're grappling with a problem, giving it some extra time will help our brain come up with a solution. In psychology, it's called the incubation effect. And it works because even though you're consciously taking a break from solving the problem, subconsciously, your mind continues to work on finding a solution. For small challenges, as little as half an hour can be enough. So if you're sitting an exam, for example, and you're stuck at the problem, you can take advantage of this. Unless it's a half-hour exam, of course. But if you're struggling with a problem that is difficult, don't bang your head against that problem trying to force the solution. Instead, skip that difficult question for now and continue with some of the easier parts. Then, about half hour later, return to that difficult question, and I promise you, you'll be much more likely to solve the question. My third piece of advice is to seek help. Easier said than done. But try to find someone who has overcome a similar challenge before, or someone who has the right skills or resources to help you. I remember my teacher once handing me back an essay saying something like, "Olav, you're not very good at writing essays. They're not your thing." How's that for motivation? And I thought about that for a minute, but then I decided in my next study hall to ask the best writer in our class if I could borrow his essay. And I did, and I compared his essay to mine. It took me 10 minutes, only 10 minutes, but I saw so many things that I could have done better and so many things that I could implement into my next essay. But you might even find that the best advice comes from someone who isn't necessarily better than you. It's just that they have a different point of view. 2 heads can think better than 1. Remember the building manager and the mirrors? The mirrors weren't the building manager's idea. The idea came from someone else because he sought help. So, to recap on how to unleash the power of how questions. 1, define the right problem so that you can ask the right how question to begin with. 2, give it some time. And 3, seek help. Finally, I want you to think about an ambition that you've set for yourself. A challenge or a goal which may seem out of reach, like learning a new language, saving enough money for a cool car, or becoming better at basketball. Something that's really important to you. And instead of asking yourself, can I learn a new language? Can I save enough money for a car? Can I become better at basketball? Ask yourself, how? Thank you.